運命には逆らえません。桜吹雪。全力攻撃。逃げようなんて思わないでよね。運命の共栄、これが運命です。桜吹雪。失礼。
Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. After playing with my level 90 Ayaka for over a day now, doing plenty of research and theory crafting prior to her release, and finally plenty of testing, here is a complete and comprehensive guide to Kamisato Ayaka. This video is going to be a different style compared to my usual guide videos, and I'll try to talk fast because there is a lot of info to go through. So starting off, let's take a look at her talents. And we're going to go a bit out of order because parts of her kit build up on other parts of her kit. So we're going to start with this most simple part of her kit, her elemental skill, the Kamisato art, Hyoka. Now her E, unlike other characters, has only one version, just a tap version, and it takes around 56 frames to execute. It hits in a circle around her, has a pretty respectable multiplier at 383 at level 8, and it generates, I believe, 4 to 5 particles and has a 10-second cooldown. And finally, thanks to her Ascension 2's passive, it also provides 30% increased damage for 6 seconds to her normal and charge attacks. Now you don't actually have to hit anything with this elemental skill in order for it to buff her basic attacks. So when you use it, you can see here that she has this cool cryo aura thing that's like emanating from her. That's how you know that the basic attack buff is on. Next up is her unique dash, the Kamisato art Senho. It is only shared with Mona. Currently, only Mona and Ayaka have this dash. So basically the way it works is that she goes underground and then she pops up. When she pops up, she actually hits things around her with cryo. And before we hit something to apply cryo onto it, the Prima Vishap, you can see right now that her attacks are just normal yellow or whatever color. That means they're doing physical damage. But after she does her dash, you can see now that they are in the cryo color. And this lasts for 5 seconds after her dash, after she pops up from her dash, the cryo infusion. So if we use her dash and pop up, we can see now that the Primo Vishap has cryo on it. And that can be very useful for many different reasons, but also when you hit things with her dash, it boosts her cryo damage. So it boosts it by 18% up until 79.6%. And I believe it's indicated by those arrows, which have now disappeared. You can see how now her cryo damage is back down to 61.6%. Very useful in some ways and very not useful in other ways, but also when the dash connects, it also restores a little bit of stamina, so that way Ayaka has better stamina management than, for example, a character like Mona. Really quick, we have her exploration passive or whatever. When she crafts weapon ascension material, she has a 10% chance of receiving double the product. Not much to say about that. And now that we understand her elemental skill and her unique dash, we can talk about her basic attacks. So both her elemental skill and her dash enhance her basic attacks. Her basic attacks are pretty cool looking. Her normal attack has 5 parts to it, but you'll probably rarely find yourself using all 5 parts of it if you want to be optimal in her DPS. I wanted to actually show the animation, so let's change the camera angle. And her charge attack does 3 hits in this little flurry of slashes, and you can actually jump cancel it and dash cancel it right when the slashes come out. But if you do it too early, you'll snuff out the attack. And that applies for dash as well, so you want to be careful when you try to animation cancel it. You want to time it properly. And you see that I did too early. And if you do it too late, you actually lose out on DPS compared to just normally. So it's a fine balance. Now, knowing all this, what we can do is we can do a combination of, everything that we just learned. So we can use dash, E, N2, charged attack, and then cancel it with the dash. So you can see there I messed up the combo. It does take a little bit of practice, but you'll get the hang of it over time. And I haven't really done it that much myself, but that's kind of the general idea in terms of using her basic attacks. You want to interweave dashes and E's in between in order to keep the cryo infusion and the 30% bonus buff on her. So finally, let's talk about the best part about her kit, which is her elemental burst, the Kamisato art Sometsu. Ayaka's burst travels slowly forward and does a ton of hits. If all hits connect, it ends up doing 19 cutting damage and explodes at the very end, which does the bloom damage for a little bit of extra damage. So one way to easily utilize Ayaka's burst is to freeze or even petrify enemies, or even like CC enemies with Venti's burst. Then Ayaka's burst will stay on them to do all of its hits. Alternatively, you can do this to a large monster like the Primoji Bishop or the Pyroregisvine, both of which this works extremely well against. So what makes this burst really amazing is the fact that at level 9, this burst ends up doing 3,913% skill damage. To put this into perspective, Ganyu's fully charged charge shots do a lot of damage, but Ayaka's burst is equivalent to 6.5 of Ganyu's charge shots, which is absolutely insane. And finally, Ayaka's energy drain from her burst happens very quickly, so you can E right before you cast her burst, and she will catch those energy particles, and you'll see that her burst starts off with a little bit of energy instead of being empty, and that is thanks to her burst draining the energy extremely quickly. So it is always important to talk about the drawbacks, which are not limited to the 80 energy cost and some difficulty aiming. You may have trouble getting it to hit all the targets, but that is where supports come in to really help assist with getting Ayaka's burst to hit everything. With some practice and some decent positioning, you can work around both its energy cost and aiming problems. So I'll quickly talk about Ayaka's constellations, even though in this video we won't be using any of them. So Ayaka's Constellation 1 can reduce her elemental skill by 0.3 seconds, 50% of the time when her basic attacks connect. I believe according to some people that have it, they say it can reduce her elemental skill down to roughly 5 seconds or so, 5 to 6 seconds. And this is pretty powerful because it allows Ayaka to, use the higher DPS on her elemental skill, but also generate a lot more particles for her burst. Next is her Constellation 2, which really boosts her burst damage by quite a bit, especially if you can get the 2 smaller burst things to hit. Now that can be pretty challenging because they shoot off at different angles, like roughly 30 degrees to the left and 30 degrees to the right of the main one. But if you do get both of them to connect all their hits, that's around 40% additional damage, which is pretty crazy considering her elemental burst already does a ton of damage. And her Constellation 3 is very simple. It just adds 3 levels to her elemental burst. This increases her damage for most characters by around 18% or so. I did not do the calculations for Ayaka, but you can expect her burst to do another 18 to 20% more damage thanks to the additional skill levels on her burst. And her Constellation 4 further increases her burst's utility and damage by shredding defense by 30%. This leads to, I think off the top of my head, 15 to 25% additional damage on the target. Very, very powerful constellation again. So as you can see, her constellations 2, 3, and 4 all boost her burst damage by quite a bit. And what's crazy is that they're all multiplicative to each other. So you can see how her constellations are really jacking up her burst damage. Constellation 5 boosts the talent level of her E a bit, which is okay, not that great. And finally, her Constellation 6 increases her charge attack damage. I don't fully know how this works, but if you're a whale, you're going to get this anyway, and you're going to be able to tell what it does. So finally, we're getting into some math and artifacts for Ayaka. As usual, my numbers are damage maximized numbers. I wrote an algorithm that shuffles around main stats and subsets to find optimal stat distribution for a specific character, weapon, and artifact set combination. You can usually reach 70 to 80% of the numbers in this sheet if you farm a lot of artifacts, around 6,000 to 10,000 resin worth of artifacts. So looking at this chart, it's pretty clear which set is best for Ayaka, and that is the Blizzard Strayer set. So the Blizzard Strayer not only provides the 15% additional cryo damage, but it also provides 20 to 40% crit rate, 20% if the enemy just has cryo, and 40% if the enemy is frozen. Since Ayaka is also a cryo character, with cryo resonance, that's another 15% crit rate, putting her at 55% bonus crit rate against a frozen target. So as such, you can stack pretty much a ton of crit damage with this set. This makes this an extremely powerful artifact set. As you can see in the chart, there is no close second place when it comes to fighting against a frozen target to the 4-piece Blizzard set. Because Ayaka does a ton of little damage, you always want a good crit rate to crit damage ratio, 1 to 2 generally speaking, but you always want to factor in the bonus crit rate as well when you calculate that 1 to 2 ratio. Now, the next best set is still the 4-piece Blizzard, but it is against a target with cryo on them, and that still puts this artifact set at a very clear first place, beating the second best set combination of the 2-piece Blizzard and 2-piece Gladiators. Now let's talk about the 2-piece Blizzard and 2-piece Gladiators, and this is actually not completely useless to know because it's the best in slot combination against enemies that cannot be cryoed. For example, Electro Slimes, Electro Hypostasis, the Animo Box Cube thing, maybe the Pyro Cube. I actually haven't even fought the Pyro Cube yet, so I don't know if you can apply other elements onto it, but you kind of get the point. Basically, enemies that cannot have cryo applied to them, this set will be a very good and very well-rounded set. Also, really quick for artifacts, like with pretty much any attack percent scaling carry, you want an attack percent timepiece, you want a cryo damage goblet, and you want a crit damage circlet, especially with the Blizzard set, because you're going to get a lot of free crit rate depending on the scenario. And generally speaking, after you factor in the bonus crit rate, you want to have a 1 to 2 crit damage ratio, but do be careful of overcrit. In that situation, you will have too much crit rate. Any amount of crit rate over 100% is usually worthless. There are a few events that subtract crit rate, so do keep that in mind, but for most situations, any crit rate over 100% is useless. But now that we finally established her artifacts, we can finally talk about her weapons. So here is a chart with damage maximized numbers for her weapons. We're going to be assuming that she is running the 4-piece Blizzard against a frozen target, but without cryo resonance, so this gives her 40% bonus crit rate total. So originally I had sorted this chart based on her basic attack damage, but let's be real, Ayaka's brokenness comes from her 3,913% burst multiplier that pops out just by pressing Q. So instead I decided to sort this chart by burst damage instead. Anyway, here we have the full chart as usual with all the whale weapons. To no one's surprise, the Refinement 5 Mist Splitter is the best sword for Ayaka, but let's condense this chart into something more useful for the majority of us. So now that we're looking at this more condensed chart, I wanted to start off with the free-to-play weapons that I recommend the most. The first one is definitely the Blackcliff Longsword, and being a cryo DPS, Ayaka has access to Blizzard and cryo resonance, and this can add up to 55% crit rate against a frozen target. And with, for example, a support like Rosaria for particles and cryo damage, you can reach up to 70% bonus crit rate. As such, the crit damage substat is extremely valuable, and you may be wondering, oh, why is the crit damage substat so valuable? In general, parties can easily buff attack. You can get attack percent very easily with Pyro Resonance, Noblesse Oblige, Tenacity 4-piece. You can get it from Bennett. You can get it from the Thrilling Tales of Dragonslayer, which provides a whopping 48%. Anyway, you get the point. There are a lot of sources for boosting attack. However, there are currently no sources outside of very rarely used food items that boost crit damage. So usually the bottleneck multiplier for many teams is crit damage, and you generally want to stack that as much as possible, assuming you have enough crit rate. And fortunately for Ayaka, she also has crit damage as an ascension stat. That's why you get crazy stats like 55.9% crit rate and 234.8% crit damage. You can see that my individual artifacts aren't actually that crazy. Sure, this one has a decent amount of crit rate. This one has pretty good stats overall. This one is actually one of the better artifacts that I have. And the goblet is pretty much bad. You know, it only has 1 extra roll into crit rate, and the crit damage circlet is also really bad. It only has 1 extra roll into crit rate. My off piece is the best goblet that I own on my entire account, which does have really good crit damage and crit rate. But you can see how these artifacts, while they're great, right, they're solid artifacts, they're nothing that crazy. You know, these artifacts are achievable in about, I'd say, 8,000 to 10,000 resin worth of farming. You know, that is a lot of dedication, but you can get there. Anyway, I got a little bit derailed. I was talking about the Blackcliff Slasher. Of course, the passive is situational, and there are times where it does become useful, but generally speaking, it's not that great because Ayaka, you want to get her buffs up and then cast her burst, and that's it, right? So by the time her burst is done, usually everything is dead. And if they're not dead, then Ayaka starts to do a lot less damage. So, you know, you want to avoid that situation. In the end, I'm going to be using my highly accurate and reliable slime rating system. Originally, I gave this weapon a 3 slime rating, but given its ease of access, as well as its occasionally useful passive, and finally its extremely valuable crit damage substat, I'm bumping this up to 3.5 slimes out of 5 slimes. But now let's talk about the overall best weapons for Ayaka. Starting off with the Mist Splitter Reforged. As you can tell, mine isn't fully leveled yet. The Mist Splitters Reforged, I'll be doing a full review of this weapon later on, but it's fairly practical to use her burst with 3 stacks. Knowing this is unquestionably the best weapon for her burst, and easily deserves a 5 slime rating out of 5 slime. It is also the best weapon for her basic attack damage as well. So if we take a look at the Mist Splitter at Refinement 5 versus a Blackcliff with 0 stacks, we can see that the R5 Mist Splitter is doing 118% versus the Blackcliff 73%. This means that the Mist Splitter at Refinement 5 is doing around 60% more damage on her burst, which is absolutely insane. The next weapon I wanted to quickly talk about is the Summit Shaper. It's an alright choice, but building stacks with a bunch of her normal attacks and then also needing a shield and then finally using her burst is very restrictive. There isn't much else to say, but given the lack of other really good swords, the Summit Shaper still deserves a 4 slime out of 5 slime rating. And the next sword to talk about is the Jade Cutter. Unfortunately, the Jade Cutter really does suffer from over crit on Ayaka, but even with the absurd amount of crit damage rolls that my maximizer algorithm gravitates towards when you use the Jade Cutter actually isn't that high on this list. But despite that, it's still a great weapon and it's unconditional. And it's still one of the best weapons against non-cryable enemies like the aforementioned Electro Slimes, Electro Hypostasis, etc. It also has the additional benefits of not needing to build 1 stack with a Mist Splitter before you use the burst, or build a bunch of stacks with a shield like the Summit Shaper. So all in all, this is a great unconditional weapon, deserving a 4 slime rating. And next I want to talk about the Black Sword. The Black Sword is still overall a good choice. It boosts her basic attack damage by quite a bit, and even though most of Ayaka's damage comes from her burst, boosting her basic attack damage is still great to have. Now unfortunately this does have the crit rate substat, which can be bad, it can be good, but it makes it susceptible to over crit as well. Nonetheless, still a very solid choice, and I believe this sword deserves a 3 slime out of 5 slime rating. Next is the Anemona Kageuchi, which is a great choice as well, and also being completely free to play and craftable. This one provides some free energy, which can be situationally useful and can allow her to use her burst, again, much more quickly. Now unfortunately this does lack the crit damage substat, which is very useful on Ayaka. However, I believe this is still a great choice, deserving 3 slimes out of 5 slimes. As for other swords worth mentioning, the Harbinger of Dawn is perfectly usable on Ayaka. The Alley Flash is pretty solid too, as long as you don't get hit, so I recommend a shield. Even comparatively flavorless swords like the Flute and Lion's Roar are all usable on Ayaka, and they are comparable in damage to the Anemona Kageuchi. Last but not least, the 5-star weapons, the Skyward Blade and Aquila Favonia, are both decent options as well. Last but not least, let's talk about teams for Ayaka. Ayaka, as demonstrated, is extremely powerful in a freeze composition. As such, you want a Hydro character with her, and in my opinion, the best Hydro character to pair with Ayaka is Mona. Mona just adds so much bonus damage and is a great wielder of the Thrilling Tales of Dragonslayer and Tenacity of Millelith. So she ends up offering 60% bonus damage and 68% attack, as well as being able to freeze the enemy for the duration of Ayaka's burst. Very powerful, and in my opinion, the best support character for Ayaka. If you don't have Mona or you're using Mona on another team, I guess the next best Hydro applicator is Xingqiu. Xingqiu does decent off-field DPS, single target DPS himself with his burst, and Xingqiu does have higher uptime on his freeze when you do have his burst up in comparison to a character like Mona. So overall, Xingqiu is a great support unit for Ayaka to apply freeze. Now unfortunately, if you don't have Mona or Xingqiu or Constellation 4 Tartaglia, you're kind of just left with Barbara. And unfortunately, Barbara's off-field Hydro application is pretty poor to say the least, and she also doesn't offer that damage amplification that Mona does. So, you know, I guess you can use her if you need to, but it's not something that I would necessarily recommend. Now, as for the other 2 teammates, generally outside of Ayaka and Hydro support, the other 2 slots are extremely flexible. And in fact, even the Hydro support like Mona is actually flexible depending on the situation, but we'll get to that later. For these 2 slots, I generally like to focus on one of the following. You either want to increase Ayaka's damage through damage amplification, or you provide her the utility to increase her damage, and finally you can improve her quality of life, or, you know, decrease the amount of time between her cycles with a battery like another cryo unit. Starting off with damage amplification, obviously Bennett, right? Bennett's good for pretty much any team. He buffs Ayaka's insane burst damage even more. Bennett has been broken since release, and he is broken with Ayaka as well. Zhongli is another support that really stands out to me as well. Obviously, Zhongli provides the crowd control, petrification, he provides the shield. Ayaka does get easily interrupted when she's using her basic attacks. Zhongli also provides 20% universal resistance shred. You can even have him as an energy support character with the Favonius Lance. Overall, an extremely flexible character, and Zhongli is a very powerful support for Ayaka. Finally, you can also consider cryo characters like Diona. Cryo characters like Diona provide the Cryo Resonance, which provides 15% additional crit rate against cryo units, and also Diona provides a lot of cryo particles for Ayaka to fuel her burst, and finally Diona provides a good shield and some healing as well. You have other cryo supports as well that all provide something different. Ganyu can provide, crazy burst. You can also use Chongyun to more easily infuse Ayaka's stuff as well as lower her cooldowns and provide cryo resonance and cryo particles. You can use Eula, I guess. I actually like using Eula with Ayaka as well. You just have two really broken bursts. And you can use Kaya for particles as well as additional cryo damage. And of course, let's not forget about Rosaria. Rosaria is another great cryo character with Ayaka being able to provide a lot of cryo particles as well as being able to provide cryo resonance. And finally, the additional crit rate with her burst up. Lastly, we have the Anemo supports, Venti and Kazuha. Both of them are broken in different ways. Kazuha is the better damage amplifier, and also he provides a good amount of crowd control, and Venti provides obviously the best crowd control in the entire game. Both of them can shred cryo resistance, which makes them extremely powerful because you're just jacking up Ayaka's crazy burst damage even more. And these three characters, for example, Mona, Ayaka plus an Anemo character like Venti or Kazuha, can combine to really make it easy to hit everything with Ayaka's burst, as demonstrated in my earlier 12-1-1 run, where I utilized these three characters to basically lock the Geovishaps in place, gather them up, and then Ayaka's burst easily hit both of them, clearing them out in no time at all. And finally, we have this really interesting composition, and I'm going to call this the Super Nuke comp. And this is because you have Ayaka's crazy burst doing, hundreds of thousands of damage, and then you can follow up with Hu Tao using her burst and then melting her charge attacks after that to do, well over 1 million damage with Hu Tao as well. So I think this composition has a lot of interesting potential against targets that have a ton of hit points. Of course, right now, nothing in the game can come close to surviving that, but we'll see in the future if we get more enemies like that Primo Geovishap that had 2 million hit points. And sorry guys, I know this video took a lot longer than I expected in terms of the duration of the video, but there's just so much that I want to talk about for Ayaka. And since my Day 1 C0 showcase, which the link to will be in the description below, as well as in an end card, my opinions of Ayaka have changed in the sense that I think she's even better than how amazing I thought she was already on Day 1. Now, is she at Ganyu's level, or even Hu Tao or Eula's level? Right now, that's a bit hard to say. But I will be doing a DPS showdown between Ayaka and Ganyu, and potentially a third character. I'm not entirely sure who the third character should be, either Eula or Hu Tao, or maybe someone else. Let me know in the comments below who you want the third character in the DPS showdown to be, between Ayaka, Ganyu, and then the third character. Anyway, I'd really appreciate it if you smash that subscribe button. It's insane that you guys have brought me to 100,000 subscribers, so thank you all so much. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.